Being adjudged an enemy of the realm and a traitor, he was also guilty of returning to the realm when he was banished, without permission of Parliament, stealing £60,000 from 2 great ships, of taking arms against peers of the realm, and aiding other traitors in the murder of the Earl of Hereford, of falsely imprisoning the Earl of Lancaster and arranging his death. So he was sentenced to death. As a thief, he was sentenced to hanging, and as a traitor, he was sentenced to being drawn and quartered. Here's what happened to him. One account says he was firmly tied to a ladder and his genitals sliced off and burned while he was still conscious. His entrails were slowly pulled out. Finally, his heart was cut out and thrown into a fire. Edward II was born in Wales in 1284 and made the first Prince of Wales in 1301. In 1307, he was crowned King of England. Edward grew up to be tall and muscular and was considered good-looking by the standards of the period. Piers was born in Cornwall in 1284. Piers' father was a knight who served Edward's father for many years. Because of this, the king ensured his family was well protected and provided an income and security. Piers became a member of the royal household in 1300 when he was moved to the royal court, where he met Edward I's son, Edward II. They were both around the age of 16 and they were very close. Some people believed they were more than close friends. They were lovers. So today we're going to talk about their relationship and how Edward II became the most famously gay British monarch. But before we get started, if you're new to my channel, welcome. Here on Mortal Faces, I take historic portraits and recreate them to see how individuals we read about might have looked in real life, as well as untangle their family trees. While on my channel, subscribe for more historical recreations and let me know in the comments who you want to see in real life. Piers was extremely ambitious and talented, and held considerable influence over Edward II. Piers was consistently described in contemporary chronicles as handsome, athletic, and well-mannered. In 1307, Edward had a massive argument with his father, and after this, Edward I banished Piers from England. But before he left, Edward II ensured Piers was given loads of gifts. A few months later, Edward I died and Edward II was made king. He immediately brought back Piers and made him Earl of Cornwall and chief advisor. Piers also acted as the king's regent while the king was in France. Edward gave Piers land, money, and even a wife. Piers even married Edward's niece Margaret. The new king's love for Gaveston was known to be beyond measure and reason, immoderate, inordinate, and excessive. Indeed, wrote the contemporary author of the well-regarded Vita Edwardi Secundi, I do not remember to have heard that one man so loved another. Our king was incapable of moderate favor. While the author goes on to say that Gaveston was thus accounted a sorcerer, Robert de Reading went even further, asserting that Edward entered into illicit and sinful unions, rejecting the sweet embraces of his wife. In hopes to gain a relationship between France and England, Edward married Isabella, the daughter of King Philip IV of France, and were crowned together in Westminster Abbey in 1308. Piers had a very prominent role in Edward's coronation, which made his barons angry and jealous. They found Piers to be extremely arrogant, and Edward paid so much attention to Piers that even Isabella's French relatives walked out. It is said that after Edward returned from his wedding, he ran to Gaveston and showered him with kisses and hugs. Later that month, at his coronation, Gaveston arrived dressed in purple and in pearls. The king spent very little time on the queen's couch. Both men bore children with their wives, but in the 1320s, an anomalous chronicler described how Edward felt such love for Gaveston that he entered into a covenant of consistency and bound himself with him before all other mortals with a bond of indissoluble love firmly drawn up and fastened with a knot. The first specific suggestion that Edward engaged in sexual relations with men was recorded in 1334 when Adam Orleton, the Bishop of Winchester, was accused of having stated in 1326 that Edward was a sodomite, although Orleton defended himself by arguing that he had meant that Edward's advisor, Hugh Despenser the Younger, was a sodomite rather than the late king. The Mew Chronicle from the 1390s simply notes that Edward gave himself too much to the vice of sodomy. Everyone had enough of Piers, and by 1311 the king was forced to agree to the election of the Ordainers. This was where a committee of earls, barons, and bishops made rules for the management of the royal household. And one of the new rules was that Piers was exiled and never returned. Edward said he would agree to all the new rules if Piers was allowed to stay, but the Ordainers didn't allow this. Piers was forced to leave the country, but it wasn't long until he was back again. You see, Edward announced that Piers' exile was unlawful, and so just brought him back. The country was brewing on civil war by this time, and the barons really had enough, so they privately gathered their army. Edward and Piers were nearly captured in Newcastle, but managed to escape and fled to Scarborough. With careful planning, the earls were able to isolate Piers at Scarborough Castle when the king left for York. Piers was besieged at the castle by the Earls of Pembroke and Warwick. Piers agreed to surrender to the Earl of Pembroke, who guaranteed Piers' safety and took him to Dedington in Oxfordshire. The Earl of Warwick, with the support of the Earls of Lancaster, Arundel, and Hereford, sentenced Piers to death for treachery. In June 19, 1312, Piers was taken to the Blacklow Hill, not far from Warwick, on a piece of land owned by Lancaster, and here, 2 Welshmen ran him through with a sword and beheaded him. He would have been about 28 years old. Piers' body was left to rot, but later buried at King's Langley in Hertfordshire in orders of the king. Piers, however, wasn't Edward's last close friend, though. In 1318, another one of Edward's favorites was made royal chamberlain. He was called Hugh Despenser the Younger. Hugh was a nobleman. His father was called Hugh Despenser, but also known as Hugh Despenser the Elder. He showed great loyalty to the king, Edward I, in 1306, and so Edward I married Hugh the Younger to his youngest granddaughter, Eleanor de Clare, and then Edward II secretly became just as interested with Hugh the Younger as he was with Gaveston. It is said that Edward did whatever he wanted, and so he showered him with honors and titles. Hugh then began to dominate the English government and foreign policy, and this angered the powerful nobles once again, who saw Hugh as a threat. So in 1321, a group of barons took Hugh Despenser's lands from England and Wales, as well as Hugh's father's lands, and exiled the both of them. But in 1322, Edward II just brought them back. Instead, Edward had imprisoned all the English barons who had sent them away. Edward then gave Hugh the Younger the barons' lands, making him the richest man in the country. In 1324, Edward II went to war against Charles IV of France and put Hugh in charge of directing the war. Hugh forced many men and women to give him lands and money, and those who refused were imprisoned. So during this war with France, Despenser did many things to anger Edward's wife, Queen Isabella, due to her French heritage, even removing Isabella's children from her care. Isabella allied herself with Roger Mortimer at this time, who was a powerful English baron, and in 1326 they launched an attack on England. The king and Despenser were finally captured on the south of Wales. Despenser's father was captured and executed in Bristol, and the king was captured and taken to Kenilworth Castle. Hugh Despenser was hanged, drawn, and quartered at Hereford. A few weeks after Despenser's execution, the king was forced to pass the throne to his son, who became Edward III, and then Edward II was moved to Berkeley Castle, where he is believed that he was murdered. Many speculate how he was murdered, and his most famous story is rumored. On the night of 21st September 1327, he was held down and a red-hot poker pushed into his anus through a drenching horn. His screams could be heard for miles around. And that brings us to the end of this video. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe for more videos. Each of your subscriptions does help this channel grow. It allows me to continue making more content for you. Let me know in the comments who you want to see next. I do make a list of all your suggestions, and I will see you in the next one.